Welcome to Bullion Bulletin. With me now, Mr. David Mendelawitz. He is Managing Director of Cleveland Mining Company Limited, Australia. Welcome to Bullion Bulletin. Welcome to IIGC in India. You are based in Australia. Where is your mines are located? In Australia or out of Australia?
Oh, so our mine is in Brazil. So we deliberately operate outside of Australia because although Australia has got a long history of very successful gold mining, it's extremely expensive. And one of the reasons it's so expensive is because of its long history. It's been explored very heavily. It's got a lot of players in there, a lot of money in there. But now the standard of living of the workers in the mining industry is very, very high compared to worldwide. So their salaries are very, very high, and it makes it cost prohibitive for us. So we find that our unit costs, our labour costs are so high, and our opportunities are so low because of it. So we looked around the world and said, where can we actually make money at the bottom of the market? And one of the few places in the world that we could do so and do so ethically and sustainably was in central Brazil.
What is best thing about Brazil? How government is promoting this sector?
Look, I mean, the government doesn't promote it heavily. I mean, from a government standpoint, there's a very low sovereign risk. We believe that compared to many parts of Africa or many other parts of South America or Asia, there's very low risk of the government coming and taking the project off us. And in the mining industry, the risks are very, very high and the capital outlays are very high. So in the last 10 years, there's been approximately 1 in 10,000 success rate from project going to mine worldwide. So for us, it takes many years to go and find a project, to develop that project, and the last thing that we want is it to be taken off us in the end. So we believe that Brazil has the best mix of low labour cost, low power cost because they have a lot of hydroelectricity, high opportunities because there's lots of prospective geology there, but also low sovereign risks. So we match it up and we think it's got that ideal mix. That said, Brazil it's very difficult. I mean, because there is not a history of junior miners, small mining companies like us. The big guys have gone in there and made lots of money. The little guys have all failed. And that's because there isn't the industry support. So we've been there for 7 years. And now we know Brazil. We know how to operate in Brazil.
So taxation and regulations, how?
Look, taxation is like India. I mean, you've got a big population, not quite as big as India, obviously, but with the big population comes a big bureaucracy, and lots of departments all wanting to charge their own tax and so on. So, I think Brazil and India are the only places that I'm aware of where you've got a tax on a tax. So taxation is complicated, but there is, like India, it's complicated, but it's a process, and once you understand that process, then you can follow it, and the taxes are fine. I hear a lot of discussion in India here about tax. Everybody's talking about tax in India, but I think the problem is not tax. I mean, we pay a effective tax rate of about 34% in Brazil. Now, there's obviously things we can do to help that, and things that we can do to make it worse. But it's very similar to Australia in terms of our corporate tax. It's just we might pay 7 different taxes to get there as opposed to 1. And it's the same thing here. The problem I see in India with regard to taxation is people aren't making enough money, so they're concentrating on the tax, and the tax is the enemy. But the tax is not the enemy. Neither in Brazil nor here is it the enemy.
So now coming to that mining sector, so what is the current, Brazil must have good reserves, very strong reserves, I feel that country must have. Basically this gold, where are you supplying? How this gold is coming out of Brazil? Are you supplying to the Asian countries or looking to supply to Asian countries? What is this all about?
Look, the reality, there's not a huge amount of gold being produced at the moment. I mean, there's some major companies. I mean, for instance, my next door neighbour is Anglo Gold Ashanti. They've got a few operations in Brazil, but Brazil's not setting the world on fire with regard to gold production. Could it be? Potentially. I mean, there's a lot of gold in Brazil. Brazil is a very, very large country.
Yeah.
It's bigger than Australia.
Right.
The greenstone belts I would say are just as good as Australia. I mean, it's, similar size there to the US. I mean, the greenstone belts, the gold producing belts are just as good, but it hasn't been explored thoroughly. And there's around about 900,000 artisanal miners there. So they go and tell us where the gold is. The problem we have is the way that the gold's distributed in Brazil tends to be different to what we're used to in Australia or in the US. So we run under a system called JORC in Australia. It's a way of accounting for metal reserves or mineral reserves. The Canadians use 43101 as their way of doing it. But unfortunately, they grow from the known, and a lot of what we see there, and for example, probably let me precede that, in iron ore, people self-funded, so they didn't need JORC. They didn't need to tell the market what they did. It was Vale, BHP, Rio Tinto, major companies. So the JORC standards for iron ore were not up to scratch. And so when, prior to being in the gold industry, I was also in the iron ore industry, and we didn't know how to tackle JORC. Now we see the same in Brazil. There was very large areas of mineralisation, lots of gold, but when you drill them, they don't necessarily come up and meet the JORC standards, right? There's an area there called Pocono in Mato Grosso in northwestern Brazil. There's 400 million tonnes of tailings sitting over a 100-kilometre distance. When you drill that ground, you say there's no gold there. But the guys who are operating produce lots of gold every single day, and the 400 million tonnes of spoil show they have for a long time. But meeting JORC compliance is almost impossible on the current standards. So it's very difficult for a Western country, a Canadian or Australian, and those countries are probably the most significant because we've got the best speculative stock exchanges. But we can't go in there and report that we've got gold unless we can meet these standards. But the style of mineralisation at the moment doesn't correspond well to the JORC processes. So it really holds people back. So yes, there's a lot of mineralisation there, but we have to do things differently, and so we have to be able to take risks in a way that we can define the gold, but in a different standard.
So what you are looking at India exactly?
Why India? Okay, so look, as a miner, particularly a miner who's in a jurisdiction where I've got the problems I just discussed there, we always want money. We always need money, right? And because it's so capital intensive. We might spend $100 million before getting out 1 gram of gold.
Right.
I mean, at the moment, I'm happy when I move 20,000 tonnes of material to get 1 kilogram of gold. And, but I have to get to that point even to know where to dig that. So it's very, very expensive. So I see India has got problems, the Indian gold industry. But I see there's a lot of money as well. I think there's a very strong interface that can be had between miners like myself and who are operating in places that don't have really consolidated refining industry or jewellery industry, and places like India. There's a lot of refining capacity, there's a huge jewellery industry, and there's an absolute love of gold. I mean, it's culturally so significant here that I think people talk, at the conference they talk about the demand going up and down, but Indians will always have gold. I mean, there's 30 to 40 million ounces a year going just into the wedding market, but the biggest gold producer in the world produces less than 6 million ounces, right?
Right.
So this is a nation that needs and loves and uses gold every day, whereas most
so
people
you are
don't.
basically looking for investment to get some investment from India, or you are trying to supply some of your mine gold to this country?
I think twofold, really. One is investment. I'm always looking for investment. That's, as the CEO of a gold company, I always am. But I think that what I have to offer India is something that my friends here in India really need as well, is I have a very, very pure source. I don't use a lot of chemicals. I don't damage the environment much. And I think that that's rare in the gold industry. The gold industry does a lot of damage to the environment. In general, we use a lot of chemicals. We knock over jungles, we dig big holes and so on. Now, I do some of that, but I think I do it pretty well. And I think that what we're suffering in India here is a lack of credibility in the gold industry. I think that because the margins are so low, that people have been forced to go to effectively corrupt or dodgy practices, right? And I think that that's put a big cloud over the industry. So, they have a great desire to be matched to a miner such as myself, who knows that we can do things the right way without using slave labour or chemicals or bashing down the, important jungles and so on, because they're doing the right things at this end. So we think that there's certainly a market here for a new standard within those parameters where people can work together, produce an ethically high standard gold product, and then market it as such wherever it is in the world.
How are you enjoying the conference?
I think it's fantastic. It's a wonderful setting. The hotel's awesome. The people are excellent. And it's very educational for me. I find it amazing. I'm the only miner in the whole conference, and probably one of the most important conferences in the gold industry in the world.
Right.
So I feel very privileged to be here with good people, and I'll be back next year.
Thank you, sir, with your kind words.